She said, "I don't deserve this date." Her voice was soft, the kind of quiet that carried more weight than shouting ever could. The candle between them flickered, as if unsure whether to stay or die, and he could see her fingers trembling as they brushed the rim of her glass. The restaurant around them was humming with laughter, clinking glasses, and the murmur of easy conversation, but their table felt like a small island cut off from it all. He looked at her for a long second before he spoke, really looked, the way her hair had come loose from the braid, the way her eyes didn't quite meet his, and the small, nervous smile that didn't reach her lips. He took a breath, leaned forward slightly, and said, "Good." She blinked, confusion flashing in her eyes. "Good," she repeated, almost incredulous. He nodded slowly. "Because I didn't plan this date for someone who deserves it. I planned it for someone who needed to be reminded that she's worth it." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than the music, heavier than the wine she hadn't touched. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Her throat moved as she swallowed hard, trying to find something to say, but every word that wanted to escape felt too small. He smiled, not the kind of smile that expected anything back, just the kind that wanted her to breathe again. "You've been through a lot," he said softly. "You keep thinking you have to earn everything. Even kindness." Her eyes glistened in the candlelight, and she looked down, blinking fast. "You don't know that. I don't have to," he said. "I can see it." The waiter came and refilled their water glasses, polite and invisible at once, and when he walked away, she exhaled slowly, as if she'd been holding her breath for minutes. "You make it sound like I'm broken." He shook his head. "Not broken. Just tired of pretending you're fine." She stared at him, studying his face, the earnestness, the stillness behind his words. It wasn't pity, it was something deeper, something she wasn't used to. It scared her, and yet it felt like warmth sneaking past the walls she'd built. "Why do you even care?" she asked. He took a sip of his drink, set it down carefully, and said, "Because I've been where you are." She frowned, her voice skeptical but quieter now. You seem like the kind of person who always has it together." He laughed softly, not bitterly, just truthfully. "I used to be really good at pretending, too." The music changed, a soft piano cover of an old love song, and the room seemed to settle into a gentler rhythm. Outside, the city was alive with the faint sound of traffic and distant laughter, but inside, time slowed. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "So, what, you're here to save me?" "No," he said immediately, shaking his head. "I'm not here to save anyone. I'm just here because I wanted to spend an evening with you. The rest of it is just, whatever happens." Her eyes softened a little. There was something freeing in that, something disarming about someone who didn't want to fix her. For a while, they didn't talk. The food arrived, salmon glazed with lemon butter for her, steak for him. She tried to focus on it, but her appetite had been replaced by a kind of restless flutter in her chest. He didn't push her to talk, didn't fill the silence with noise. He just existed there with her, calmly, like silence itself was part of the conversation. After a while, she said, "You know, I almost didn't come." "I figured," he said with a faint smile. "Why?" He shrugged. "You canceled twice before." She gave a guilty laugh. "You noticed." "Of course I noticed," he said. "But I also noticed you still replied to every message. You wanted to come, you just didn't think you should." That made her go quiet again. "You make it sound like you can read my mind." "No," he said softly. "Just your patterns." She looked down at her plate, pushing her food around. "It's easier to stay home," she admitted. "Easier to convince myself I don't need to do things like this." "Like what?" "Be seen." His chest tightened at the honesty in her voice. "You want to know a secret?" She looked up, half smiling despite herself. "Sure." He leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to make her lean closer too. "Everyone feels that way sometimes. Even the ones who look like they belong everywhere." She tilted her head. "You?" He nodded. "Especially me." She studied him, the calm in his voice, the steadiness of his gaze, and realized that maybe calmness didn't come from having it all figured out. Maybe it came from surviving the storm long enough to know it passes. "You're too smooth," she said, smirking lightly, trying to break the tension. He grinned. "You think I practiced that line in the mirror? Did you?" He laughed. "Maybe." The ease returned for a moment, laughter cutting through the heaviness. The waiter came back to ask if they wanted dessert, and she surprised herself by saying yes. They shared a slice of chocolate cake, and for the first time that evening, she forgot to keep her guard up. He watched the way she smiled when she finally took a bite, small, real, like she'd just remembered what sweetness could taste like. "See," he said, "you deserve this cake, at least." She rolled her eyes. "You're impossible. I get that a lot. Do your dates usually end with emotional interventions?" He chuckled. "No. Usually they end with me realizing I shouldn't have ordered dessert." She laughed, shaking her head. "You're weird. I'm okay with that," he said simply. Something in his simplicity disarmed her more than any compliment ever could. She'd dated people who said all the right words, who made promises too heavy for their own sincerity. But this man, sitting across from her, seemed to carry no agenda. Just presence. And presence, she realized, was rarer than charm. As they left the restaurant, the city had settled into that late-hour quiet, not empty, just slower. Streetlights cast halos on the pavement, and the cool air brushed against her skin. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself, partly for warmth, partly for comfort. He walked beside her, not too close, not too far, hands in his pockets. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It felt like a shared exhale. "I really didn't think I'd enjoy tonight," she said after a while. He glanced at her. "But you did." "I did," she admitted. "I don't know why. Maybe because you stopped trying to deserve it." She smiled faintly. "You're still on that. Always." They stopped at the corner where they'd parked in different directions. The night seemed to stretch for a moment, heavy with something unspoken. She didn't want to say goodbye yet, and she didn't understand why. "You know," she said, "you make it really hard to stay miserable." He laughed quietly. "Good. Then I did something right." She hesitated, then asked, "What if I mess this up?" He looked at her, eyes steady. "Then we'll clean it up together." Her throat tightened again, and she hated that tears were threatening to form, not because she was sad, but because she hadn't realized how much she needed to hear something like that. When he finally turned to leave, she stood there for a while, watching him walk away, the sound of his footsteps fading into the hum of the night. She could still feel the warmth of his words, lingering like an aftertaste she didn't want to lose. Driving home, she thought about everything, how strange it was that someone could look at you and see the parts you'd worked so hard to hide. She'd spent years perfecting the art of composure, of making everyone believe she was fine. She'd told herself she didn't need softness, that independence was her armor. But tonight, sitting across from someone who didn't ask her to be anything but human, she'd felt that armor crack. When she got home, she kicked off her heels, sat on the couch, and stared at the text message screen for a long time. There was a message from him already waiting. "Thank you for coming tonight. I know it wasn't easy. Sleep well." She stared at it, thumb hovering over the keyboard. For a moment, she wanted to overthink, to dissect every word, to question his intentions. But instead, she typed back, "Thank you for not asking me to pretend." Then, after a moment's pause, she added, "I'd like to see you again." The dots appeared almost instantly. "Then I guess I'm lucky," he replied. "Because I was going to ask you the same thing." She smiled, not the polite kind, not the forced kind, the kind that reached her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she had to deserve anything. She just felt enough. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual, sunlight filtering through the curtains. The world felt slightly lighter, like something invisible had shifted. She made coffee, still thinking about his words. "I didn't plan this for someone who deserves it." The line replayed in her mind, and every time it did, it hit differently. Maybe worth didn't have to be earned. Maybe it was something you remembered. The week that followed was slow but strange. She found herself noticing things, the warmth of her morning coffee, the laughter of a coworker, the simple comfort of a song she used to love. Little things she'd ignored before. It wasn't magic, it was just that she'd stopped numbing herself to the good. When he texted again midweek, "Dinner again. Or maybe something less fancy this time," she didn't hesitate. "Surprise me," she wrote back. He picked her up on Friday, casual in jeans and a worn jacket. When she opened the door, he smiled. "Ready for something different?" She raised an eyebrow. "Define different." He grinned. "No candles, no wine. Just real food and bad music." He drove her to a small diner near the edge of town, Neon lights buzzing faintly, the smell of grilled onions and old coffee in the air. It was the kind of place where the waitresses called you, hun, and every booth had a story carved into it. She laughed when she saw it. "This is your idea of a date. This is my idea of real," he said. They sat in a booth, shared fries, and talked about everything: childhood, mistakes, favorite songs, the things they were still learning to forgive in themselves. He told her about the time he almost gave up on writing, about the rejection emails that piled up until he stopped counting. She told him about her mother's illness, the loneliness that followed, and how she'd built her life around being useful to others so she wouldn't have to think about herself. Neither of them tried to fix the other. They just listened. At one point, the jukebox switched to a slow song, something old and dreamy. He stood up, held out his hand. "Dance with me." She laughed. "Here. Why not? There's like 5 people eating eggs and pancakes. They'll live." She hesitated, then took his hand. His touch was steady, warm, and she let herself lean into it. They swayed in that cramped space, the sound of clinking dishes and low laughter around them. It wasn't graceful, but it was real. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was performing. When the song ended, he didn't let go right away. He looked at her and said quietly, "You keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, don't you?" She swallowed. "Maybe." He brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "Then maybe this time, it doesn't." Her eyes softened, and she looked away before the emotion could spill over. But she smiled, a small, trembling smile that said more than words could. That night, as he drove her home, the silence between them felt safe. When they reached her place, she didn't want to say goodbye. Not because she feared losing him, but because she didn't want to lose the version of herself that existed around him, the version that allowed herself to feel again. Before she stepped out of the car, she turned to him. "You were right," she said. "About what?" "I didn't deserve the date," she said with a half smile. "But maybe that's the point." He smiled back, eyes soft. "Exactly." She closed the door, walked toward her building, and looked back once. He waved, and she waved back, heart lighter than it had been in a long time. As the door closed behind her, she whispered to herself, "Maybe I do deserve good things after all." And somewhere between doubt and hope, between the memory of a candlelit table and the echo of laughter in a diner, she started to believe it.